Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, September 12th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Blinken hints that the U.S. will allow long-range strikes in Russia. So on Wednesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken strongly hinted that the U.S. was preparing to lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of U.S. and NATO missiles to support long-range strikes inside Russian territory, which, of course, would mean a big escalation of the proxy war. Speaking at a press conference in Kiev alongside UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, Blinken said that he discussed the issue of long-range fires with Zelensky and said that he would bring the discussion back to Washington. He said President Biden and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will discuss the issue when they meet this Friday. Starmer's coming to Washington. Blinken, so this is his quote that really makes it sound like they're ready to do this. And then there's some reports that say that the decision has essentially been made. So when he was asked about this, Blinken said, quote, "Speaking for the United States from day one, as you've heard me say, we have adjusted and adapted as needs have changed, as the battlefield has changed, and I have no doubt that we'll continue to do that," end quote. And basically what he's saying there is, throughout this war, the U.S. and NATO, there were things that they considered red lines that they didn't want to cross, like initially sending the HIMARS rocket systems, like sending tanks, fighter jets. They would say, no, we're not going to do that. We don't want to risk World War III. And then a few months later, they would go ahead and take that step. And this is something similar that we're seeing here. So The Guardian reported that British government sources indicated that there's already been a decision made in private to allow Ukraine to use British-provided missiles inside Ukraine, which have a range of about 155 miles. Those are the Storm Shadow missiles. The sources said that Biden and Starmer are not expected to announce the decision this Friday when they meet, and it's unclear when it might be made public. So it's kind of saying that, yeah, they decided that they're going to do this, but they're not going to come out with it right away, I guess. And then later on Wednesday, after I published this story, I updated it because Politico had a report that said the White House is finalizing plans to expand the area where Ukraine can hit inside Russia using U.S. and British-provided missiles. So Politico is saying that the White House is preparing to do this. And as I covered yesterday, Michael McCall, the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, super ultra hawk, said that based on conversations he had with Blinken, he thought they were going to give him the okay. And it looks like Blinken is the one who's really pushing for this within the Biden administration, which isn't a surprise. He's a completely disgraceful Secretary of State, the worst diplomat, one of the worst diplomats I've ever seen operate. And so one thing that happened on Wednesday as well is Russia said that it started pushing back Ukrainian forces in Kursk and that they started capturing some of the villages that they were holding. And if you see this map from South Front here, this yellow area is where they're saying that Russia is gaining ground. So there's a chance that they might start pushing the Ukrainians back. Fighting has been pretty heavy inside Kursk still, but Ukraine hasn't gained any territory in a little while. But although they are kind of pushing in other areas. So the fighting, I think, is still going to be going on for a while, but it does look like Russia's starting to get some momentum in the other direction here. And then, of course, in the Donbass and eastern Ukraine, Russian forces continue to move. So, what is the purpose of long-range missile strikes? What is that going to accomplish? It's just going to escalate things and risk a major response from Russia. And it just doesn't seem like that's a concern for anyone within the Biden administration. All right, so the next one here, Russia says that it could combine with China if they both face a threat from the U.S. So Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said Wednesday that Russia's partnership with China, I almost said Ukraine, Russia's partnership with China is not aimed at any third country, but the two countries could combine to respond to threats from the U.S. She said, quote, "I would like to remind you that Moscow and Beijing will respond to double containment by the United States with double counteraction," end quote. And she said that in response to a question about this U.S. plan to deploy one of these new Typhoon missile systems to Japan that can fire Tomahawk missiles. It's a land-based missile system that would have been prohibited under the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, that the U.S. pulled out of in 2019. So after the U.S. pulled out of that treaty, they started developing these systems. The U.S. recently deployed one to the Philippines. Now they're going to send one to Japan. And, temporary deployments, but for long, in the Philippines, I think it was there for like 5-6 months, maybe. And the U.S. is also planning to deploy this system. They haven't specified that it's going to be this system, but they say that they're going to deploy Tomahawk, missiles and SM-6 missiles, which can also be fired by the Typhoon. So this is probably what it's going to be to Germany. If you remember, during the NATO summit, that was one of the announcements that the U.S. made, was that they're going to deploy these new missiles to Germany. And I think that is the thing that annoyed the Russians the most. That was the biggest response. All the stuff that happened at the NATO summit, it seemed like the thing that got under the Russians' skin the most was that announcement. So, they're talking about similar threats that Russia and China are going to be facing from the U.S. with these new missiles. So Zakharova said, quote, "It is clear that both Russia and China will react to the emergence of additional and very significant missile threats, and their reaction will be far from being political, which has also been repeatedly confirmed by the two countries," end quote. So her comments come amid Russia just launched some large-scale naval exercises. These are global drills that involve over 90,000 personnel, 400 warships and submarines, and 120 aircraft. China is participating in the Pacific portion of the drill with 3 Chinese ships and 15 planes. So Russia and China have increased their military cooperation in recent years. In response, it's been a direct response to the similar pressure that they're facing from the U.S. and its allies. And Zakharova insisted that the relationship is defensive in nature. She said, quote, "Our relations are not directed against third countries, and double counteraction does not contradict this. This is a defensive position. This is not an initiative to target other countries. But if an aggressive policy of attack is being implemented against us from one center, why don't we combine our potential and give an appropriate rebuff," end quote. So this is, the lines, obviously the lines have been drawn for a long time now, but just hearing this kind of talk, like, you think of the potential for World War III, like a real World War III, Russia, China versus the U.S. and NATO and whatever Asia Pacific countries join the U.S. I mean, man, that's just the end of the world. And, these are real conversations that are happening now. All right, so the next one here, Blinken announces $700 million in new aid for Ukraine. So this was another thing that Blinken said while he was in Ukraine, that the U.S. will be providing $700 million. And this is aid to repair Ukraine's energy infrastructure and other things like that. And then Lammy, the British Foreign Secretary, announced that the UK will be providing $782 million in humanitarian assistance and loan guarantees through the World Bank. So according to the State Department, the $700 million from the U.S. is broken down into 3 categories. $325 million will go toward supporting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, which has been destroyed by Russia. They've really escalated the strikes on the energy infrastructure. in response to the Kursk invasion, but it's something they've been hitting the energy infrastructure hard for a long time now. Also, $290 million to go toward what they call humanitarian assistance, and $102 million will be spent on demining and removing unexploded ordnances. And of course, the U.S. is playing a big role in leaving unexploded bombs behind in Ukraine by sending the cluster bombs. All right, so I want to mention our sponsor for today's show, and that is the Expat Money Summit that is being put on by Mikkel Thorup. And this is the world's largest offshore event that is being held entirely online from October 7th to October 11th. And again, it's being put on by Mikkel Thorup, who's the host of the Expat Money Show and a highly sought-after expat consultant with decades of experience. So at this conference, you'll discover ways to preserve your liberty and wealth through international diversification. Also learn about how you could set up a plan B, get a passport in another country, the places where that's easy, some of the places that are welcoming to expats. It's interesting stuff. And headline speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, and Tom Luongo, and many more. And there's a lot of geopolitics because that's important to an expat, to somebody who wants to live in another place or kind of move around the world, which I know some of you do who listen to this show. So this is definitely for you. And if you're ever thinking about it or just want to learn about it, again, it's from October 7th to the 11th. It's free. So you go to expatmoneysummit.com to get your free ticket. And if you want a VIP ticket, and you'll get access to all these different types of panels, one of which I'll be doing about the risk of World War III. Follow the link in the description, or if you go on the site, expatmoneysummit.com, you can put in the code anti-war when you check out for the VIP ticket to get a nice discount. So go check that out. All right, let's get back into the news here. So to get into Gaza, it was a really brutal day in Gaza. Israeli strikes kill 64 Palestinians. So Israel's relentless assault on the Gaza Strip continued on Wednesday, and Gaza's health ministry reported that at least 64 Palestinians were killed in the previous 24-hour period. The latest violence brings the number of Palestinians killed by Israeli forces in Gaza since October 7th to 41,084, and this is according to the health ministry's figures, which don't account for the people who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. It's considered an undercount. The ministry said that the number of wounded has reached 95,029. So you think about all the people maimed from this, and all the people who have lost family members, all the children who have lost their parents, and just the horror that goes on every day in Gaza. And these are American bombs, American weapons, American possibly intelligence being used to carry out these strikes. Strikes in Gaza on Wednesday included the bombing of a UN school turned shelter for displaced Palestinians in the Nusret refugee camp in central Gaza. The strike killed at least 14 people, including 2 children and a woman, and wounded 18 others. The UN's Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, said that 6 of its employees were killed in the bombing. So they're saying, a lot of UNRWA employees have been killed by Israel. They're saying this is the most killed in a single incident. UNRWA said, quote, among those killed was the manager of the UNRWA shelter and other team members providing assistance to displaced people. This school has been hit 5 times since the war began. It is home to around 12,000 displaced people, mainly women and children. So if you look at the picture I put in here, it shows how big this school is. You can see the damage from the inside, and you look and see kind of like these balconies and all the people standing around. So they say 12,000 people sheltering in this school. So without providing evidence, of course, Israel claimed that it targeted a Hamas command center. And then there was other strikes across Gaza. An Israeli strike targeted a home in Khan Yunis early Wednesday, killing 11 people. And the European hospital, which received the casualties, said that the dead included 6 brothers and sisters ranging in age from 21 months old to 21 years old. So you see these instances of like entire families being wiped out, 21 months to 21 years old, just wiped out. Gaza's civil defense said that an Israeli airstrike targeted Palestinians waiting in a line for bread in Gaza City, killing 3 people and wounding 7. Late Tuesday night, a strike was reported in the Jabalia refugee camp that targeted a home, killing 9, including 6 women and children. So the Biden administration continues to support the genocidal slaughter in Gaza by providing weapons and political support and all that. And, I'm mentioning this in a lot of stories. That recent story I went over, a senior Israeli Air Force official saying that if not for the U.S. military aid, if not for the support from the U.S., we could only sustain operations in Gaza for a few months. So it goes to show how reliant Israel is, how much the U.S. is enabling this slaughter, this genocide, this just complete horror show that's happening every single day in Gaza. And it's not even like you look at the debate the other night, they just touched on it for a few minutes, and the two argued over who's more loyal to Israel. All right, so the next one here, Israeli army kills Palestinians in fresh West Bank raid. So this article's from the Middle East Eye. Israeli forces killed at least 5 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank city of Tubis on Wednesday as it continued mass raids across the territory, including by detaining emergency service workers in Tulkarm. The 5 men were killed in an Israeli airstrike at dawn near Al-Tawid Mosque in Tubis. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said that it received the bodies after Israeli authorities initially prevented ambulances from reaching the site. Wafa news agency identified the men ages 18, 19, 23, 22, 24, so very young. The airstrike came during a wider Israeli operation in the outskirts and neighborhoods of Tubis, including the use of reconnaissance planes and military helicopters. The raid involved a siege on the Turkish government hospital, with roads surrounding the medical facility being blocked off. And then there was an Israeli operation in the Tulkarm refugee camp that entered a second day. So they withdrew from Jenin, but they've invaded the Tulkarm refugee camp. Several streets were destroyed by Israeli bulldozers in the camp on Wednesday. So some people have been ejected from their homes. So these things continue. And elsewhere in the West Bank, the Israeli army said that it killed the perpetrator of a car ramming attack in the illegal Israeli outpost of Givat Asaf near Ramallah. All right, so the next one here. Why did a British Jewish newspaper publish fake Israeli intelligence? So this article is from 972 magazine. And so just to summarize it quick, I think we ran a story about this, but I didn't mention it. I skipped it on the show. So there was an article that showed up in the Jewish Chronicle, which is the UK's oldest Jewish newspaper, that basically gave credence to this claim from Netanyahu that if the Israeli army is not in control of the Philadelphia corridor, on the Gaza-Egypt border, then Hamas could smuggle hostages out to the Sinai Desert and then go to Iran or Yemen from there. And we saw, I had a story the other day about how the military rejected that idea, said that there's no evidence that Hamas can pull that off. But there was a report in the Jewish Chronicle published as an exclusive report that said Israeli intelligence sources prove that, basically saying that Sinwar intended to smuggle the remaining hostages via the Philadelphia corridor to Iran. And then this report actually said that Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, would be going with them. So it gives, it backed up Netanyahu's claim. And they said that the plan was revealed during the interrogation of a captured senior Hamas official, as well as by information obtained by documents seized on Thursday, August 29th, the day the 6 bodies of the murdered hostages were retrieved. So then it turned out, so this gained traction. It was spread all over the place. And then it turned out that it's completely fake. The story was totally made up. The day after it was published, Israel's Channel 12 refuted the article's claims, stating that all of the relevant sources in the security establishment are unaware of the supposed intelligence. Then there was another story in Bild, the German outlet, that also was basically fake. It said it was based on a document so this reported that it revealed some secret plan of Sinwar's, his strategy, that he didn't actually want a ceasefire deal. And then this turned out to be fake as well. They said there was a secret document that it cited, and apparently the document exists, but it doesn't say anything that was reported. So it's just two fake stories that were planted to give support to Netanyahu's claims and to give credence to the idea that it's Hamas that's, responsible for the lack of a ceasefire when it's clearly been Netanyahu. All right, so the next one here, U.S. diplomatic facility in Iraq comes under attack. So the U.S. Embassy in Iraq said Wednesday that a rocket attack near the Baghdad airport that occurred Tuesday night targeted a U.S. diplomatic facility. So the embassy said that it was targeted at 11 p.m. on Tuesday night on September 10th. And this attack, they say it targeted Baghdad Diplomatic Services Compound, which is a U.S. diplomatic facility. There was no reported casualties, and they're assessing the damage. Earlier, Iraqi sources said that 2 rockets fell near U.S. troops stationed at Camp Victory, which is a base in the area surrounding the Baghdad airport. So far, nobody has taken credit for the attack. What's interesting is that Kateb Hezbollah, which is one of the main Iraqi Shia militias that has been involved in previous attacks on the U.S., they condemned the attack because it came before the night before Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, was arriving in Iraq. He arrived in Iraq on Wednesday. So Kateb Hezbollah said it was meant to disrupt that visit, and they're calling for an investigation into the attack, which I thought was interesting. And the Iraqi government says they don't know who did it and that they're looking into it. And this attack, so I mentioned the debate yesterday, and I talked about a lot of things, but then the story I ended up writing about it was something I didn't mention on the show. So this is the next story. During the debate, Kamala Harris lied by claiming that no U.S. troops are deployed in combat zones. And this is something similar to what President Biden has said. He claimed that the U.S. isn't at war, and that same day he bombed Yemen. And then here we have Harris. So I'll read the quote. She said, quote, "As of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century," end quote. And that is just completely false. Hours earlier, these rockets landed near this U.S. base in Baghdad. We have seen less than 2 weeks ago, 7 U.S. troops were wounded in a raid against ISIS. Last month, U.S. troops were wounded in Iraq and Syria in rocket attacks that targeted U.S. bases. Earlier this year, 3 U.S. Army Reserve soldiers from Georgia were killed at Tower 22 in Jordan, right on the Syrian border. And you also have this battle that's been going on with the Houthis that the U.S. Navy's engaged in, that U.S. commanders say is the biggest naval battle that the U.S. has been involved in since World War II. And there's also U.S. troops deployed in Somalia, and where there's a war going on, and it's just a complete falsehood, complete lie. This idea that no U.S. troops are deployed to combat zones. So I made that the headline, and then I got into some of the things that I mentioned yesterday about the debate. All right, so the next one here, mapping 11 months of Israel-Lebanon cross-border attacks. So this article is from Al Jazeera, and I just wanted to read some of their numbers about the statistics on the cross-border attacks that Israel and Hezbollah have exchanged. So there's been 9,613 combined attacks since October 7th. 7,845 of those have been Israeli attacks on Lebanon. So the vast majority are Israeli attacks. 1,768 have been Hezbollah and other attacks on Israel. And there's been a total of 678 combined deaths, which includes 646 Lebanese deaths, and there's many civilians included in there. I believe about 100 or so, maybe more. And then 32, probably more. And then 32 Israeli deaths. So 646, so way more Lebanese deaths, way more Israeli strikes on the Lebanon side of the border. And you can see this graph here. It really goes to show kind of the difference here. And then they go through the different areas that have been attacked. So if you want some details about that, what's been going on there, definitely go check that out. All right, so the next one here, Biden overrides conditions on military aid to Egypt. So the Biden administration is overriding human rights conditions placed on military aid to Egypt to provide the country with the full $1.3 billion of annual military aid that Cairo usually receives each year. So out of the $1.3 billion, $320 million is subject to conditions under legislation that was passed by Congress, and President Biden has withheld a small portion of it each year that he's been in office until now. Last year, the administration withheld $85 million, which really isn't much out of $1.3 billion. But the main concerns, the reason why Congress did this is that Sisi, the Egyptian ruler, who I think Trump called his favorite dictator at one point, his treatment of political opponents, which has involved imprisonment and torture. There's a lot of reports about this stuff. And the administration, in their announcement, they didn't say anything like, this stuff has improved. They say, it's, for national security purposes, we're going to override this law. This is a U.S. law that they're bypassing. And this is something that is a big problem with all these foreign assistance laws that require the U.S. to end military aid to countries, that are committing human rights violations, is that there's this really big loophole to a lot of this stuff, is that the president can declare, national security purposes, I'm going to go around this. And Biden did that to send cluster bombs to Ukraine. And I mean, it's a complete farce. What national security purpose does sending cluster bombs to Ukraine accomplish besides stoking tensions with Russia, a nuclear power anyway? But so they're saying that this is related. They're doing this for Egypt's role in mediating the ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas. So Egypt's a heavy hitter when it comes to U.S. military aid. They're one of the top recipients, $1.3 billion a year. And this is an arrangement that began after Cairo signed a peace treaty with Israel in 1979. It was essentially their reward for that. So, similar to Jordan. Jordan gets a lot of military aid because of its treaty with Israel. So the U.S. kind of bribes these countries to make deals with Israel. All right, so the next one here, the House passes a $1.6 billion bill for anti-China propaganda. So this article is from Marcus Stanley at the Responsible Statecraft. So on Monday, the House passed H.R. 1157, the Countering the PRC Malign Influence Fund, by a bipartisan majority, 351 to 36. So this passed overwhelmingly. And this legislation authorizes more than $1.6 billion for the State Department and U.S. aid over the next 5 years to, among other purposes, subsidize media and civil society sources around the world to counter Chinese malign influence globally. So this is propaganda, anti-China propaganda. That's what this money is for. And this is a huge amount of money for something like that. So the example that he uses here is that it's about twice the annual operating expenditure of CNN. If passed into law, it would also represent a large increase in federal spending on international influence operations. So this is PSYOPs, basically. While it's hard to total all of the spending on U.S. influence operations across agencies, the main coordinating body for U.S. information efforts is the State Department's Global Engagement Center. It has an annual budget of less than $100 million. So again, this shows that they're spending, $1.6 billion. And there was recently that report that the Trump administration had some covert campaign to malign China's COVID vaccine, and that involves some media coverage as well. I think when it comes to this stuff, it's beyond anything that we even realize. Some of the propaganda that the U.S. is funding, or the PSYOP stuff, the influence campaigns online on social media and stuff, probably goes beyond what we can even imagine. All right, so the last story here, Iran insists that it did not send Russia ballistic missiles. So this is another one from Middle East Eye. Faced with furious U.S. accusations that Iran has supplied Russia with ballistic missiles, Iranian officials in public and private are strenuously denying the claims. A senior Iranian diplomat speaking to Middle East Eye on condition of anonymity said Russia has indeed requested military assistance from Iran since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began in 2022. The diplomat said, quote, "On multiple occasions, Russia has requested military assistance, including ballistic missiles from Iran. Yet at the highest levels, Iranian officials have categorically rejected these requests and firmly declined Moscow's appeals," end quote. So one thing, Russia has been using Iranian drones. Iran has been denying that they've been sending them drones. At one point, they said, "Oh, we gave them drones before the invasion." So, it's not exactly clear what's going on there. But I thought this was interesting because one of the reasons the Iranians are saying the U.S. is probably making this accusation now. Again, there's been no evidence of Russia using these missiles yet. They're just saying, oh, they're starting to transfer them. They say it's because Iran's new president he wants direct talks with the U.S. He wants to return to the nuclear deal. So they're saying that they're using this to scuttle the chances of diplomacy. Another thing I saw was Lammy. I might be pronouncing his name wrong. He's British. Lammy, the British Foreign Secretary. But he said in the press conference with Blinken, when they're talking about the potential of escalating the proxy war in Ukraine, that, well, there was just a huge escalation. Iran sending ballistic missiles to Russia now, so it can also be used to justify escalations of the proxy war. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Abdulrahman, Washington's disgraceful reaction to the IDF killing of Aishanur Aigi, the American who was killed in the West Bank. Please go check that out. It's a great article. It's our first original one from him. One from Daniel Larison, which is another original column. He used to write original columns for us, but it's been a little while, so we're happy to have him back. Debate debacle, our bleak foreign policy future. One from Norman Solomon, undebatable what Harris and Trump could not say about Israel and Gaza. One from Eves Engler, Canada is ending Jewish National Fund's charitable status. And our spotlight is from Anatol Levin, when will the war in Ukraine end? So please go check all of that out. That is everything for me. One more show this week. If you want to support antiwar.com, you want to support this show, share it, tell your friends, like, subscribe, comment, follow us on social media. All that stuff helps out. Share our articles around. And I appreciate everyone who does that. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.